Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're gonna crack open like a treasure chest of Philippine legal cases.
Oh.
Ones that you specifically wanted us to unpack, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
We've got everything from credit card clashes to land disputes that make your head spin.
It's always fascinating to see how, everyday life intersects with the law.
Ready to navigate these legal labyrinths with me?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
First up, we have Danilo. A David v. Bank of Philippine Islands decided back on September 29, 2021.
Okay.
This one's all too relatable.
Yeah.
Credit card debt. Danilo disputed the bank's records,
Sure.
claiming he owed way less than they said he did. It brings up that whole best evidence rule.
This case really underscores the power dynamics between, individuals and institutions when it comes to financial disputes.
Yeah.
The court sided with BPI,
Mm-hmm.
emphasizing that when it's your word against a document,
Mm-hmm.
the document usually wins.
Right.
But, a good practice is to regularly download and save your monthly statements as PDFs. That way you have a time-stamped record in case a dispute arises later.
That's a great tip. I'm adding that to my to-do list right now.
Good.
Okay, next up is Sally Gobingayan v. Spouses, Leoncio and Judy Chem Ho, decided June 28, 2021.
Okay.
A 700,000 peso loan and 2 crossed checks gone awry. It sounds like a financial thriller.
This case offers a glimpse into how judges weigh evidence and assess credibility.
Yeah.
The court actually ruled in favor of Sally, the lender,
Okay.
even though there were some inconsistencies in how the checks were filled out.
Interesting.
They focused on the fact that she was the named payee on those cross checks,
Uh-huh.
and the legal assumption that cross checks are usually issued for legitimate reasons.
Okay.
This case might have turned out differently in a legal system that places more weight on strict adherence to form over substance.
Fascinating. So even a slightly messy check can still hold up in court if the underlying purpose is clear.
Yeah.
Speaking of contracts, Subic Bay Distribution v. Western Guarantee Corp. decided November 11, 2021, takes us into the high-stakes world of distributor agreements and performance bonds.
This case showcases the legal teeth behind performance bonds,
Yeah.
which are often used to guarantee payment in commercial contracts.
Okay.
Subic Bay Distribution ended up winning over P100 million after the other party, Prime Asia Sales and Services, defaulted on payments, and the guarantor Western Guarantee Corp. tried to back out.
That's a hefty sum. And I noticed this case also touched on something called Rule 45.
Think of Rule 45 as a special key that unlocks the Supreme Court's door for a closer look at the facts,
Okay.
but only under very specific circumstances. Typically, their review is limited to legal issues, not re-examining the evidence.
Okay.
But in this case, because there was a conflict between lower courts about what happened, Rule 45 allowed the Supreme Court to step in and ensure a just outcome.
I'm getting a real sense of how these procedural rules can make or break a case.
Right.
Okay, switching gears to a more personal matter. Edna Orsolino Villanueva v. Katsuhiro Villanueva, decided February 9, 2022, explores the challenges of international divorce and the recognition of foreign judgments.
This case delves into the delicate balance between upholding legal procedures and ensuring fairness in family matters.
Okay.
Edna had obtained a divorce in another country, but the Philippines has specific requirements for recognizing foreign judgments,
Yeah.
especially in family law.
Uh-huh.
What's interesting here is that the court expressed a willingness to be flexible to ensure a just outcome for Edna, demonstrating a move towards a more compassionate application of the law.
It makes you wonder how many people face similar hurdles when navigating the legal system in cross-border situations. Now, from international matters to entrepreneurial adventures, we have Archini versus Bound, decided on November 28, 2019. This one's a cautionary tale about franchise agreements gone wrong.
This case highlights the importance of understanding the finer points of franchise agreements and seeking legal counsel
Yeah.
before making major decisions.
Uh-huh.
It reminds me of a case I handled early in my career, where a franchise tried to open a second location without proper approval from the franchisor. Things got messy quickly, leading to a lawsuit, and ultimately the franchisee losing their business.
Right.
In Archini versus Bound, the court ultimately held the franchise liable for damages for selling his franchise without the required approval, causing harm to both the franchisor and the unsuspecting buyer.
Ouch. That's a tough lesson to learn. Speaking of tricky legal situations, validity of BIR Revenue Memorandum Circular, known 65/2012 on taxability of association dues, delves into the bureaucratic maze of taxes and appeals.
Ah, yes, the world of tax law. Always
Ah,
full of twists and turns.
yeah.
This case centered around the timeliness of appeals and the concept of the immutability of judgments,
Okay,
meaning once a court decision is final, it's generally set in stone.
right.
Lesville and Dagpin won an illegal dismissal case,
Uh-huh.
but then her employer, Casilla Tan, appealed.
Okay.
There was a question about whether the appeal was filed on time,
Right.
because it turned out the original decision was improperly served,
Hmm.
directly to Dagpin instead of her lawyer.
Improper service. So a tiny technicality could potentially change the entire outcome. I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Indeed, the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that the appeal was filed on time,
Okay.
because the clock on the deadline hadn't actually started due to the improper service.
Interesting.
It emphasizes the critical role of even seemingly minor procedural details in legal proceedings.
Okay, next up we have spouses Marcelo G. Flores and Madeline Flores v. Spouses. Leopoldo Estriado and Enriqueta Estriado decided December 7, 2021.
Okay.
It's about a loan, a property foreclosure, and the importance of having the right legal counsel.
This case is a stark reminder to be incredibly diligent
Yeah.
when choosing legal representation. The Flores is
Yeah.
facing foreclosure on their property,
Okay.
hired a lawyer at E.B. Tobolenko's, who turned out to be disbarred and operating under false pretenses.
Whoa, a disbarred lawyer. What were they thinking?
It's a cautionary tale about the importance of verifying credentials and not simply trusting someone based on their word.
Yep.
The Floreses unfortunately lost their case initially, and subsequent appeals were mishandled by Tobolenko's and another lawyer who was also suspended from practice.
Oh, wow.
The financial and emotional toll must have been immense.
That's just awful. So they were victims not only of the initial loan dispute, but also of legal malpractice.
Exactly. The Supreme Court eventually stepped in and annulled the previous judgments against them,
Okay.
highlighting the concept of extrinsic fraud in legal proceedings.
Okay.
In this case, the lawyers' deceitful actions prevented the Floreses from having a fair chance to present their case and defend their rights. The Supreme Court, recognizing the grave injustice, intervened to correct the wrong.
It's a relief to know that the courts can sometimes rectify those kinds of egregious wrongs.
Right.
Shifting our focus to the balance of power within the government, Senate of the Philippines v. Executive Secretary decided, October 19, 2021, explores a constitutional clash between the legislative and executive branches.
This case dives into the separation of powers and the president's authority over the executive branch. President Duterte had issued a memo barring officials from testifying before a Senate Blue Ribbon Committee investigation into COVID-19 fund irregularities.
Okay.
The Senate argued that this was an overreach of executive power, limiting their investigative abilities.
It sounds like a high-stakes political chess match. What was the outcome?
The Supreme Court, in a nuanced decision, upheld the president's authority to control the actions of the executive branch, while making it clear that this power isn't absolute.
Right.
They acknowledged the Senate's legitimate investigative powers, but ultimately sided with the executive secretary,
Okay.
emphasizing the need to respect the separation of powers.
It seems like the court was trying to walk a tightrope, acknowledging both the need for checks and balances and the specific powers granted to each branch.
Precisely. It wasn't about one branch being right or wrong,
Yeah.
but rather about ensuring that each operates within its constitutional boundaries.
Now on to a case that underscores the importance of written contracts. Virgilio, a talk v. Supremido Conde, decided November 6, 2023. This one revolves around a land sale agreed upon payment terms and the classic, but we had a verbal agreement scenario.
Ah, yes. The perils of relying solely on verbal agreements.
Yeah.
The court dismissed the claim of a verbal agreement to delay payments,
Oh,
citing the parole evidence rule. Basically, if it's not in the written contract, it's difficult to prove it existed and it won't be considered legally binding.
that's a good reminder to always get things in writing, even if it seems like a straightforward deal. Now let's venture into the realm of criminal law with People v. Abdul Aziz A. Sampaco decided August 30, 2023. This one titles a hot-button issue, warrantless arrests.
Warrantless arrests always spark debate about individual rights versus the need for law enforcement to act swiftly. In this case, the police conducted a raid claiming they witnessed a drug transaction taking place.
Okay.
They found a significant amount of shabu on both defendants.
Okay, so a drug bust scenario. I imagine the defense argued that the arrest was illegal without a warrant.
They did, but the court upheld the warrantless arrest.
Oh.
Philippine law allows for this if a crime is being committed right in front of the police,
Right.
giving them probable cause to act immediately. In this case, the court concluded that the police had witnessed the drug transaction,
Okay.
justifying their actions.
So that firsthand observation was key to making the arrest legal. That probable cause standard seems like a tricky balancing act between individual rights and law enforcement powers.
Absolutely. It's one of those legal concepts that's constantly being tested and refined as we grapple with these competing interests.
Now let's explore Province of Maguindanao del Norte v. Bureau of Local Government Finance, decided June 26, 2023,
Okay.
which delves into the administrative intricacies of establishing a new province.
This case involves the newly created province of Maguindanao del Norte and their attempt to appoint a provincial treasurer. They filed the petition for mandamus, basically asking the Supreme Court to force the Bureau of Local Government Finance to process the appointment.
Right.
Now, typically, you can't jump straight to the Supreme Court.
Right, that whole hierarchy of courts idea we've seen in some other cases.
Right.
So what made this one special?
The Supreme Court decided to hear the case directly because it involved a novel legal question
Uh-huh.
and had significant public interest implications.
Okay.
They wanted to set a precedent for how the law applies to newly created provinces.
I see. So they made an exception because it was a unique situation that needed clarification. And did they rule in favor of the new province?
They did. They found that the Bureau had a clear legal duty to process the appointment and issued the mandamus, compelling them to act.
Okay, on to a case that proves land disputes can get incredibly complicated. Iloilo Grain Complex Corporation v. Matuka. Teresa and Ingrid Kazaspar decided April 12, 2023. This one involves an expropriation case within another expropriation case.
Oh, wow.
Right.
This case involved a dispute over a piece of land
Yeah.
owned by the Iloilo Grain Complex Corporation, or IGCC.
Okay.
The National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or NGCP, needed part of it for transmission lines.
Okay.
They tried to expropriate the land, but it turned out they'd already done that back in 1978 for a portion of the same land.
Wait, so they were trying to expropriate land they already owned?
Not exactly. The issue was a boundary dispute stemming from that earlier expropriation.
Okay.
There was confusion about which part of the land they actually owned.
Okay, so a bit of a legal landmine. What happened next?
Well, while this new case was ongoing, NGCP got a writ of possession for the disputed portion.
Okay.
That allowed them to take control of the land even before the case was settled, as long as they deposited the estimated value with the court. IGCC tried to fight it, but the lower courts sided with NGCP.
So IGCC essentially got kicked off their own land. That seems harsh. Did they appeal?
They did, but they went straight to the Supreme Court, skipping the usual appeals process.
Ah, that procedural shortcut again. Did the Supreme Court allow it?
They did not. They found that IGCC hadn't exhausted all available remedies at the lower courts,
Okay.
which is a violation of that hierarchy of courts principle.
Uh-huh.
So the case was sent back down the legal ladder for proper resolution.
This is a great example of how important it is to understand the procedural steps involved in a lawsuit. Even if you have a strong case, skipping steps can backfire.
Absolutely. The legal system relies on those procedures to ensure fairness and to prevent parties from trying to game the system.
Okay, our next case. People v. PO2 Glenford Pineda, decided December 13, 2022, sheds light on the importance of the information in a criminal case. Basically, the formal document that charges someone with a crime.
The information needs to be crystal clear about what crime is being alleged. In this case, PO2 Pineda, a police officer, was tasked with guarding a prisoner who'd been hospitalized.
Okay.
The prisoner facing murder charges managed to escape while Pineda was away from his post for a few hours.
Yikes. Not a good look for PO2 Pineda.
He was found guilty, but not of conniving with or consenting to evasion as initially charged. Instead, the RTC convicted him of evasion through negligence.
Wait, so he was convicted of something different than what the information stated?
That's where the concept of sufficiency comes into play.
Okay.
The Supreme Court upheld the conviction, finding that even though the specific wording was modified, the information still provided enough detail about the events to ensure a fair trial.
So the key is whether the information adequately informed the accused of the accusations against them, not whether it captured every nuance of the crime perfectly.
Precisely. It's about ensuring fairness and due process, not getting bogged down in hyper-technicalities.
All right, on to a case that demonstrates the power of circumstantial evidence. People v. Edgardo Catacutan y Mortera, decided February 13, 2023. This one involves a robbery with homicide, but there were no eyewitnesses to the actual crime.
This case showcases how a prosecutor can build a convincing case even without direct evidence. They used a combination of witness testimonies, placing Katakuden at the scene, physical evidence linking him to the victim, and a key piece of evidence, a witness who claimed Katakuden had confessed to the crime.
Ah, confession. That seems pretty damning, but I imagine the defense challenged that, right?
They did, arguing that the confession was hearsay, which is generally inadmissible in court.
Right.
However, there's an exception called a declaration against interest, which
Oh.
applies when someone says something that could potentially harm their own interests.
So if someone admits to something that could get them in trouble, it's more likely to be true.
That's the logic behind it.
Hmm.
And in this case, the court carefully considered the circumstances and found that the confession met the requirements for a declaration against interest.
So even without a smoking gun, so to speak, the prosecution was able to piece together a convincing case based on this circumstantial evidence and the confession.
Exactly. It highlights how even in the absence of direct evidence, a skillful presentation of circumstantial evidence can be compelling and lead to a conviction.
Okay, let's untangle the next case. MCPHC and YAP v. GPII decided February 1st, 2023. We're back to land disputes, this time with conflicting ownership claims and the critical element of good faith.
Land ownership is a complex area of law, particularly in a country like the Philippines, where property records aren't always perfect.
Yeah.
In this case, the heirs of Leonardo Bernardo Sr. entered into an agreement to sell a piece of land in 2006.
Okay.
However, they later claimed they lost the title document and had a new one issued.
Lost titles always spell trouble, so they essentially sold the same land twice.
Using the new title, they sold the land again in 2014, and the new buyer then sold it to GPII in 2015.
Okay.
The first buyers naturally cried foul,
Right.
and the case boiled down to whether the later buyers acted in good faith,
Yeah.
meaning they were unaware of the earlier sale.
Good faith, that seems subjective. How do you
Yeah.
prove something like that?
It's a tricky legal concept that requires a careful examination of the facts. In this case, the court couldn't determine GPII's good faith solely from the documents and sent the case back to the lower courts for further investigation.
This case is a cautionary tale about the importance of due diligence when buying property. Those title searches and background checks are crucial.
Absolutely. Protecting yourself from potential land disputes starts with thorough research and understanding the history of the property.
Okay, let's look at a case that highlights a common point of contention jurisdiction, or which court has the power to hear a case. Spouses Lordsey Raphael and Rowell. Raphael v. Government Service Insurance System decided July 18, 2022 explores this through a dispute between homeowners and a powerful government institution.
This case involved Lourdes Raphael, a government employee who'd taken out a housing loan from the GSIS. When she fell behind on payments, they canceled the sale and demanded she vacate the property.
Yeah.
She filed a lawsuit in regular court,
Okay.
but GSIS argued that the case should be handled by their internal board of trustees.
So a classic David versus Goliath scenario with a jurisdictional twist.
Exactly. But the Supreme Court sided with Lourdes, finding that her lawsuit was primarily a contractual dispute over the property sale,
Right.
not an internal GSIS matter.
So even though GSIS was involved, the nature of the dispute meant it could be heard in regular court.
Precisely. It underscores that jurisdiction isn't always as simple as who the parties are, but rather what the core issue is.
All right, let's move on to a case that deals with a sensitive and unfortunately all too common issue, human trafficking. People v. Candy Solero and Nikki Maravelis decided May 3, 2022 reveals the dark side of recruitment practices and exploitation.
This case involved the recruitment and exploitation of 8 women, 7 of whom were minors for prostitution.
Wow.
The victims were lured with promises of dancing jobs in Cebu, but were forced into prostitution upon arrival.
Yeah.
3 of the minors bravely testified about their harrowing experiences.
It's heartbreaking to think that these vulnerable young women were tricked and manipulated in such a horrific way.
Their testimonies were crucial to the prosecution's case, providing first-hand accounts of the exploitation they endured.
Right.
The court found both Candy and Nikki guilty of qualified trafficking in persons, a serious offense with severe penalties.
I'm glad to hear that justice was served in this case. It serves as a reminder to be vigilant about potential signs of human trafficking and to report any suspicious activity.
Absolutely. Raising awareness and actively combating human trafficking is essential to protecting vulnerable individuals and upholding basic human rights.
Okay, our next case. People v. Pedro Rama Jr., decided June 28, 2022, is a stark reminder of how far land disputes can escalate and the devastating consequences that can follow.
This case involved the tragic rape and murder of an 11-year-old girl, AAA.
Oh, no.
The accused, Pedro Rama Jr., was a neighbor who had a history of conflict with the victim's family over land ownership.
This is just horrific. It's hard to imagine how a property dispute could lead to such a brutal act.
The details are incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
AAA was attacked in her own home while her parents were away working. She was raped and then suffocated.
Oh, this is just heartbreaking.
Tragically, she managed to regain consciousness briefly and describe her attacker to her brother before succumbing to her injuries.
That must have been a vital piece of evidence, a dying declaration.
It was a key element in the prosecution's case.
Yeah.
They also presented witness testimonies placing Rama at the scene,
Right.
physical evidence linking him to the crime, and medical findings confirming the rape and cause of death.
It sounds like they built a strong case even though there were no eyewitnesses to the actual attack.
Exactly. The court meticulously examined all the evidence and found that taken together, it painted a clear and convincing picture of Rama's guilt.
This case is a tragic reminder of the dark side of human nature and how easily conflicts can spiral out of control, especially when land ownership is involved.
It highlights the critical need for peaceful conflict resolution mechanisms and the dangers of resorting to violence to settle disputes.
Okay, let's shift our focus back to procedural matters with Brian Tala I. Constantino v. People decided June 20, 2022. This case delves into the legality of warrantless arrests and the importance of ensuring proper police conduct.
Brian Tala was arrested during a police operation targeting illegal firearms. The officers claimed they found a Glock pistol in his waistband and seized it as evidence.
Okay.
They claimed it was an in flagrante delicto arrest.
Okay, so they claimed they had justification for a warrantless arrest. What was the issue then?
The plot thickens. The officers also claimed they found the same Glock pistol listed as contraband in a box that Ta'ala's alleged accomplice had picked up from a shipping company.
Wait a minute, the same gun in two places. That's quite a coincidence.
It certainly raised eyebrows.
Yeah.
The court scrutinized the evidence and found those conflicting accounts to be a clear indication of a frame-up.
So they accused the police of planting evidence. That's a serious allegation.
The court didn't take this lightly.
Yeah.
Without witnessing Ta'ala in possession of the pistol, the officers had no probable cause for the warrantless arrest.
Right.
The case was dismissed.
It's encouraging to see that the courts are willing to hold law enforcement accountable when there's evidence of misconduct.
Absolutely. Protecting individual rights from abuse of power, even by law enforcement, is fundamental to a just legal system.
Okay, our next case. People v. XXX decided July 7, 2021 deals with the sensitive topic of child sexual abuse.
Okay.
To protect the victim, we'll refer to the accused as XXX.
This case involved repeated sexual abuse of a minor by her stepfather. The victim, AAA, testified about the horrific abuse she endured.
Wow.
And the court had to carefully navigate the complexities of handling a case with such a young and vulnerable victim.
I imagine there were special procedures in place to protect child witnesses.
There are.
Yeah.
These rules recognize that children, especially those who have experienced trauma, require special accommodations to ensure they can testify truthfully and without further harm.
So the court took steps to create a safe environment for AAA to share her story.
They did. And ultimately, they found her testimony to be credible and consistent with medical findings and other corroborating evidence. They convicted XXX of qualified rape, a heinous crime that carries a severe penalty.
It's always reassuring to see the courts take these cases seriously and prioritize the well-being of the victim onto a case that illustrates how the passage of time can affect property rights. Heirs of Juan Calatina v. Heirs of Angel Yadao decided December 5, 2019.
Okay.
This one involved a land dispute where the heirs of Angel Yadao claimed to have purchased the land in 1962 and possessed it openly ever since.
Right.
They argued they'd acquired ownership through prescription, even though they didn't have the original title.
So they were claiming ownership based on possession for an extended period.
So the possession is 9/10 of the law idea. Did their argument hold up in court?
The court actually found that neither type of prescription recognized in Philippine law fit this case perfectly. While the Yadao heirs had indeed possessed the land for a long time, the validity of the original sale documents was questionable.
So it wasn't a clear-cut case of prescription? What happened then?
The court ultimately favored the Calatina heirs as the rightful owners.
Okay.
But there's a twist.
Oh.
They also ruled that the Calatina heirs were barred from recovering the land because they'd waited too long to file their lawsuit, a concept known as extinctive prescription.
So even though they were deemed the rightful owners, they couldn't get the land back because of the delay. That's a tough break.
It highlights the importance of acting promptly to protect your legal rights.
Ah.
Time can be a powerful factor in legal matters.
Okay, let's venture into the international legal arena with bankruptcy, a state of court. Charles B. Marich, a.k.a. Charlie Marich v. Mercantile Insurance Company, decided February 15th, 2022. This one involves enforcing a foreign judgment right here in the Philippines.
This case stemmed from a tragic shooting incident outside a nightclub in San Diego, California, resulting in a wrongful death lawsuit against the nightclub owner Charles Marich and his security agency.
Oh, wow.
Marich had an insurance policy with Mercantile Insurance, a Philippine company,
Right.
but they denied coverage.
So the case went to trial in California, and the victim's family won, but then they had to chase the insurance company all the way to the Philippines to collect the damages.
Precisely. And the question became whether a Philippine court would recognize and enforce a judgment issued by a California court.
That seems like uncharted territory. Did they uphold the California judgment?
They did. After meticulous review, the court found that the California judgment met all the requirements for recognition and enforcement in the Philippines. They ordered Mercantile Insurance to pay the damages.
That's fascinating. So a decision made on the other side of the world had legal weight here. What's the legal principle behind that?
It's called comity.
Okay.
Countries generally recognize and respect each other's judicial decisions,
Right.
which fosters international cooperation and upholds the rule of law globally.
Okay, from international judgments to government procurement, we have Field Investigation Office v. Enrique T. Uzon decided on November 11, 2021. This one involves allegations of irregularities in a patrol boat procurement.
Government procurement can be a breeding ground for corruption.
Uh-huh.
And this case highlights the importance of oversight and accountability.
Right.
The Field Investigation Office, or FIO, investigated the patrol boat purchase and recommended charges against several officials, including the governor of Bataan, Enrico T. Uzon.
So they were the watchdogs ensuring the procurement process was clean. But what was the legal issue in this case?
The officials tried to get the case dismissed,
Oh.
arguing that the FIO had relied on minute resolutions,
Okay.
brief summaries of Supreme Court decisions as legal precedent.
So they were trying to use summaries to dictate the outcome of their case? Did that work?
Not a chance. The Supreme Court clarified that those minute resolutions are not binding precedents,
Right.
and that each case must be evaluated on its own merits.
It makes sense that you can't just cherry-pick summaries to fit your argument.
The court emphasized the importance of thorough legal analysis and applying the law to the specific facts of each case.
Right.
Summaries simply don't provide the depth and context needed for sound legal reasoning.
Okay. On to a case that explores the world of arbitration. Cagayan de Oro City Water District v. Emmanuel P. Pazal also decided November 11, 2021. This one highlights the tension that can arise between arbitration agreements and ongoing government investigations.
Arbitration has become an increasingly popular alternative to traditional court proceedings,
Uh-huh.
but it can create complex legal scenarios when other investigations are involved.
Right.
In this case, the Cagayan de Oro City Water District, or KWD, had a dispute with Rio Verde Water Consortium over a water supply agreement.
Okay.
Rio Verde wanted to initiate arbitration as stipulated in the contract,
Right.
but KWD tried to block it.
Why would they try to block arbitration? Isn't it supposed to be a faster way to resolve disputes?
They argued that there were ongoing investigations by the Commission on Audit, or COA, into potential irregularities in the agreement,
Okay.
and that arbitration should be delayed until those investigations were complete.
So they were hoping the COA findings would work in their favor.
That seems to be the strategy.
Yeah.
However, the Supreme Court upheld the lower court's decision, ordering CWD to proceed with arbitration.
Uh-huh.
They emphasized that arbitration agreements are separate from the main contract
Okay.
and can proceed even if there are other issues or investigations going on.
So the arbitration clause held strong even with the COA investigation looming. It seems like courts generally favor upholding these agreements.
They do. Arbitration is designed to be a more efficient and streamlined process, and courts are generally reluctant to interfere with it unless there are compelling reasons to do so.
Okay, our next case involves another land dispute, but this time the focus is on the concept of cause of action, or the legal basis for filing a lawsuit. In Zenaida N. Silverio v. Spouses, Franklin and Shirley Sy decided November 13, 2019, the court had to determine whether the plaintiff had a legitimate right to sue.
Zenaida Silverio claimed ownership of a parcel of land that she alleged had been fraudulently acquired by someone else in Francisco,
Okay.
who then sold it to the Tsai spouses.
So she was trying to get the land back from the Tsai spouses, arguing they benefited from the earlier fraudulent transaction.
Exactly. She claimed the cis were buyers in bad faith because they should have known about the fraudulent nature of Francisco's title.
Right.
The cis, of course, challenged her lawsuit, arguing that she had no legal basis to sue them.
It sounds like a classic he said, she said, with a hefty dose of legal technicalities.
The case went back and forth between the lower courts,
Yeah.
with differing opinions on whether Zenaida had a valid cause of action. Ultimately, the Supreme Court sided with Zenaida,
Okay.
finding that her complaint sufficiently alleged fraud and bad faith on the part of the cis.
So she cleared that legal hurdle and was allowed to proceed with her lawsuit.
Yes, the court found that she had a right to seek legal remedies from the cis, even though they weren't directly involved in the initial alleged fraud.
This case really highlights the importance of understanding the legal principles that underpin your lawsuit.
Right.
Without a valid cause of action, you're dead in the water.
You're absolutely right. Having a solid grasp of those legal building blocks is essential for success in any legal battle.
Okay, let's move on to a case that illustrates how a seemingly minor discrepancy in a court decision can have significant consequences. People v. XXX, decided July 7, 2021, centers around a conflict between the analysis in a decision and the stated ruling.
In this case, XXX was convicted of qualified rape and violation of Section 10A of RA 7610, a law protecting children from abuse. However, while the body of the decision clearly stated that XX was guilty of qualified rape, the dispositive portion, which is the official ruling, only mentions simple rape, a lesser offense.
So there was a mismatch between the reasoning and the conclusion. That sounds like a recipe for confusion.
The Supreme Court had to weigh in and clarify which part of the decision should prevail. They ultimately ruled that the body of the decision, which found XXX guilty of the more serious charge of qualified rape, should stand.
So they essentially corrected the error in the dispositive portion.
Precisely. They recognized that the dispositive portion should generally control, but there's an exception when there's a clear error that contradicts the analysis and findings of the court.
This case.
That's right. Irene S. Rosario was embroiled in a bureaucratic battle with the Commission on Audit, or COA. It stemmed from a renovation project at the Employees Compensation Commission, ECC, where she worked. COA had issued a disallowance, finding certain expenditures improper and holding officials liable.
So Irene was caught in the crosshairs of this audit because of irregularities in the project, even though she wasn't directly involved in procurement.
That's precisely the point she argued.
Yeah.
However, lower courts upheld the disallowance. But the Supreme Court, in a twist, ruled in her favor. They found that she'd been exonerated in a previous administrative case related to the same renovation project.
So they basically said, you can't punish her twice for the same thing.
Exactly. The Supreme Court emphasized the principle of finality of judgment.
Right.
Once a case is decided and the decision becomes final, you can't keep rehashing the same issue.
It's a good reminder that the legal system values consistency and closure. Now let's look at Frank Colmenar v. Apollo. A Colmenar decided June 21st, 2021.
Okay.
It involves an inheritance dispute and the ripple effects of procedural rule changes.
This case shows how timing can be everything in legal matters. While Frank Colmenar's lawsuit for his inheritance was ongoing, the rules of court, which dictate legal procedures, underwent some major revisions.
Okay.
Those revisions specifically affected how affirmative defenses, arguments used to counter a claim, need to be presented in court.
So Frank filed his case under the old rules, but then the rules changed mid-game, potentially impacting his case.
That's the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
The Court of Appeals actually dismissed his case, saying he hadn't properly stated his case under the new rules. However, the Supreme Court stepped in and reversed that decision,
Oh, wow.
ruling in Frank's favor.
So they recognized that applying the new rules retroactively would be unfair.
Precisely. The Supreme Court emphasized that procedural rules should be used to ensure a just outcome, not to create technical roadblocks that could lead to an unjust result. They weren't going to let Frank be penalized for filing his lawsuit before the rule change.
It's good to know the court has that flexibility to prevent unfair outcomes. Now let's dive into the sometimes controversial world of plea bargaining with People v. Michael Sabater, decided on January 8, 2020.
Plea bargaining allows a defendant to plead guilty to a lesser offense in exchange for a lighter sentence.
Right.
It can be a useful tool for resolving cases more efficiently, but it also raises questions about whether justice is truly served.
Right.
In this case, Michael Sabater,
Yeah.
initially charged with a serious drug offense, proposed a plea bargain to a lesser charge.
I imagine the prosecution has to agree to the deal for it to go through, right?
They do, and in this case, the prosecutor actually objected to the plea bargain.
Hmm.
However, the trial court accepted Sabater's plea to the lesser offense anyway.
Hold on, the court went against the prosecutor's wishes. That seems a bit unusual.
The Supreme Court ultimately found that the trial court overstepped its authority by accepting the plea without the prosecutor's consent.
Okay.
They emphasized that plea bargaining requires a mutual agreement between the prosecution and the defense.
So it's not a unilateral decision by the judge, even if they think it's the best course of action.
Exactly. The court underscored the importance of respecting prosecutorial discretion, particularly in a situation like plea bargaining, which significantly impacts the outcome of the case.
Okay. From plea bargains to power struggles between institutions. We have Cathay Pacific Steel Corporation v. COA, decided May 4, 2021. It involves electricity discounts, bureaucratic delays, and a clash over the finality of judgments.
This case really highlights the importance of respecting court decisions even for government agencies.
Yeah.
Cathay Pacific Steel Corporation, or Capasco, was entitled to discounted electricity bills under a special program, but the National Power Corporation, NPC, responsible for implementing the program, didn't follow the guidelines, leading to a dispute over the amount owed to Capasco.
Sounds like another bureaucratic nightmare. I'm guessing Capasco took them to court.
They did, and the Court of Appeals ruled in their favor, ordering NPC to pay over $24 million in discounts.
Wow.
However, despite the court order, NPC still refused to pay.
So Capasco went back to court to enforce the judgment?
They did, but instead of going through the court system,
Right.
they filed a money claim with COA, the Commission on Audit.
Wait, so they tried to get COA to enforce a court judgment? That seems like going to the wrong department.
You'd think so. And the Supreme Court agreed.
Yeah.
While COA has broad authority over government spending, they can't just overturn or modify a court order. Doing so would undermine the entire judicial process.
It seems like COA was trying to play judge, jury, and executioner.
The Supreme Court put them back in their lane, emphasizing that COA's role is to audit government expenditures,
Yeah.
not to second-guess court decisions.
This case really reinforces the need for clear boundaries between different government agencies to ensure a functioning legal system. Okay, let's move on to a case that might resonate with anyone living in a subdivision or condo, Ferndale Homes. Homeowners Association, Inc. v. Spouses. Harlan Cast-Abion and Daryl Grace-Abion decided April 28, 2021.
Okay.
Homeowner associations often face challenges in collecting dues, and this case illustrates the importance of following procedural rules, especially when appealing court decisions. The Abion spouses fell behind on their association dues, and the association, not surprisingly, took legal action.
Unpaid dues can really throw a wrench in the gears of a homeowner association. What happened when the case went to court?
The lower courts sided with the homeowner association, but the Abion spouses appealed the decision without posting the required supersedious bond.
Supersedious bond. That sounds complicated. What's that all about?
It's essentially a form of security you have to post when you're appealing a decision that involves a monetary judgment.
Okay.
It protects the winning party in case the appeal fails.
So it's like insurance for the homeowner association, in case the Abion spouses lose their appeal.
You could say that. But by failing to post this bond, the Abion spouses essentially doomed their appeal from the start. The Supreme Court deemed their appeal defective because of the missing bond.
It's a stark reminder that procedural rules can be just as important as the legal arguments themselves.
Absolutely. Navigating the legal system successfully requires a solid understanding of both the substance of the law and the procedures that govern how it's applied. Okay, from homeowner associations to a dispute with a much bigger entity. The Republic of the Philippines, we have Republic v. Susan Datuan, decided July 28, 2020.
Okay.
This one involves land ownership and the power of a request for admission.
Land disputes involving the government can be incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And this case shows how a procedural misstep can have a major impact on the outcome. The Republic was trying to cancel and revert several land titles, claiming the lands were inalienable, meaning they belonged to the state and shouldn't have been privately owned.
So the government was trying to reclaim these lands? I imagine the landowners weren't too happy about that.
You're right.
Yeah.
But here's where the twist comes in.
Okay.
The trial court granted a summary judgment in favor of the landowners, essentially dismissing the Republic's case without a full trial.
Wow, a summary judgment. That seems like a quick ending to what could have been a drawn-out battle. What was the reasoning behind that?
The trial court found that the Republic hadn't properly responded to a request for admission filed by landowners.
I'm guessing a request for admission is a legal tactic, but what does it actually entail?
It's a way to streamline a case by getting the other party to admit or deny certain facts.
Uh-huh.
In this case, the landowner sent a list of statements to the Republic,
Right.
and the Republic messed up their response, essentially admitting to those statements.
So a procedural mistake led to the dismissal of their entire case? That
Oh.
seems a bit harsh.
It does, and the Republic appealed that decision. The Supreme Court agreed that the trial court had made an error in granting summary judgment solely based on the mishandled request for admission.
So the Supreme Court said, hold on, let's have a proper trial and hear all the arguments.
Exactly. They weren't going to let a technicality derail the entire case. It reinforces the principle that procedural rules, while important, shouldn't be used to unfairly prevent a case from being heard on its merits.
Okay, next up, we have Ombudsman v. Joel Rustica, decided July 8, 2020.
Okay?
This one delves into the jurisdictional boundaries of the Sandigan Ban,
Right.
a special court that handles corruption cases.
The Sandigan ban plays a vital role in combating government corruption, but its jurisdiction isn't unlimited. This case involved Joel Rustica,
Okay.
a former mayor charged with violating the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act. The question was whether his alleged crimes fell under the Sandigan ban's authority.
So it became a debate about which court had the power to hear his case.
Precisely. The Supreme Court had to clarify how recent amendments to the law that established the Sandigan ban had impacted its jurisdiction.
It sounds like a legal puzzle. Did they ultimately decide that Rustica's case belonged in the Sandigan Ban?
They did not. They determined that the Sandigan ban's jurisdiction depends on the specifics of the charges,
Uh-huh.
particularly the amount of damage caused to the government.
Right.
In this case, the allegations against Rustica didn't meet the monetary threshold required for the Sandigan ban to have jurisdiction.
So his case had to be transferred to a regular court.
Exactly. It's a good example of how even a specialized court like the Sandigan ban has limits to its authority.
Okay. From the Sandigan Ban to the realm of civil registration, we have Republic v. Gloria e Tamario, decided July 28, 2020.
Okay.
This case revolves around the process of correcting errors in official records, specifically birth certificates.
Gloria Tamario wanted to have her filiation legally recognized and sought to correct entries in her birth certificate. The Republic, however, argued that her petition should be dismissed
Okay.
because she hadn't included all the necessary parties.
She hadn't included everyone who might have a stake in the outcome.
That's right.
Mm.
The Republic argued that her biological father and his heirs should have been included as parties to the case,
Right.
which is generally required to ensure everyone's rights are protected.
Seems like a valid point. Did the court agree and dismiss her petition?
They did not. The Supreme Court ruled that the failure to include those parties didn't automatically invalidate her entire petition.
Okay.
They acknowledged that she'd made efforts to locate and notify her father and his heirs, but her attempts were unsuccessful.
So she demonstrated she'd acted in good faith to try and find them.
Exactly. The court recognized her good faith efforts and allowed her petition to proceed.
Right.
They also pointed out that she had published the petition in a newspaper, which served as public notice,
Right.
further mitigating the issue of not including all parties.
This case shows how the courts try to balance procedural rules with fairness and a common sense approach, especially when dealing with sensitive personal matters.
You've hit the nail on the head. The Supreme Court often emphasizes that procedural technicalities shouldn't be used to completely block someone from seeking a remedy, especially when they've demonstrated good faith in trying to comply with the rules.
Okay, let's move on to TSJV v. DOTR, decided July 6, 2020.
Okay.
This one involves government contracts, arbitration, and the sometimes blurry lines of authority between different agencies.
TSJV, a construction company, and the Department of Transportation DOTR had a dispute over a government project. The dispute went to arbitration, and TSJV was awarded a significant sum of money. However, the DOTR tried to delay payment, arguing that it needed COA approval.
So COA, the Commission on Audit, steps in again, but this time they're reviewing an arbitration award.
That's right. COA ultimately approved a partial payment, but disallowed several of TSJV's claims, reducing the total amount they would receive.
They exercised their audit power to scrutinize the award, ensuring the government wasn't paying for anything improper.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
But TSJV wasn't happy about the reduction and challenged COI's decision, arguing they didn't have the authority to modify a final arbitration award.
So it became a power struggle over who had the final say. What did the Supreme Court decide?
They clarified that while COA has broad authority to audit government expenditures,
Uh-huh.
they can't overrule a final and executory decision made by another body like an arbitration tribunal.
So they drew a line in the sand saying COA can't just second-guess the outcome of a properly conducted arbitration.
Precisely. They emphasized that doing so would undermine the integrity and finality of those arbitration proceedings.
This case highlights the importance of clear jurisdictional boundaries and respecting the decisions made by authorized bodies.
It's a key principle of good governance and ensures a more efficient and fair legal system.
Okay, let's shift gears to Aniaclado v. GSIS, decided October 6, 2021.
Okay.
It's a cautionary tale about the often overlooked details of loan agreements, particularly with government institutions.
This case involved a loan from the GSIS, the Government Service Insurance System, which spiraled out of control due to accumulated interest and penalties. Aniaclado's initial loan was around PHP 147,000, but ballooned to over PHP 638,000.
That's an astronomical increase. What happened? Did she simply miss payments, or was there more to the story?
She did fall behind on payments, and that's where those penalties started piling up.
Yeah.
She tried to fight those charges, arguing that they were excessive and that she hadn't been properly informed about the consequences of late payments.
So she claimed she wasn't fully aware of how quickly those charges could accumulate.
That was her argument.
Right.
But the court ultimately sided with the GSIS.
Right.
They found that the loan agreements clearly stated the terms and conditions, including the interest rates and penalty charges, and that GSIS had sent multiple notices about her outstanding balance.
So they essentially said ignorance of the contract is no excuse.
It's a harsh lesson, but the court emphasized the importance of reading and understanding any contract before signing it. They also noted that GSIS had fulfilled its obligation to inform her about the potential consequences of non-payment.
This case is a strong reminder to never underestimate the power of the fine print.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask questions and seek clarification on anything that seems unclear or potentially problematic.
Okay, let's delve into Development Bank of the Philippines v. Evelina Tokol, decided October 6, 2021.
Okay.
It revisits a principle we've seen before, the parole evidence rule, in the context of a business loan dispute.
The parole evidence rule is all about upholding the sanctity of written contracts.
Right.
In this case, Catherine Togel secured a loan from the Development Bank of the Philippines,
Okay.
or DBP, for a poultry grower project.
Mm-hmm.
However, DBP claimed there were additional conditions attached to the loan that weren't included in the written agreement.
So they were trying to impose unwritten rules on her. What were these alleged side agreements?
DBP argued that Catherine had verbally agreed to invest a specific amount of equity in the project and to build a certain number of poultry houses. When she didn't meet these alleged conditions, DBP tried to withhold further loan disbursements.
That seems like a classic bait-and-switch tactic. Did the court buy their argument?
They did not. They cited the parole evidence rule and refused to consider those alleged verbal agreements.
Huh.
They emphasized that written contracts are crucial for ensuring clarity and preventing disputes based on conflicting memories or interpretations.
It's a consistent theme we've seen throughout these cases. Written agreements are king.
You've got it. Clear, concise contracts protect both parties involved and minimize the potential for misunderstandings down the road.
Okay, our next case, Teresa P. Sierra v. Addy. Joseph Anthony M. Alejandro, decided August 23, 2023, takes us into the world of legal ethics with a serious accusation: forum shopping.
Forum shopping is a big no-no in the legal profession. It's when a party tries to game the system by filing multiple lawsuits in different courts, hoping to find a judge who will rule in their favor.
So in this case, Addy Alejandro was accused of filing 2 lawsuits related to the same issue.
That was the allegation. He'd filed 2 separate actions, seeking a preliminary injunction,
Okay.
essentially a temporary court order. Teresa Sierra, the opposing party, cried foul, claiming he was trying to manipulate the system to get a favorable outcome.
I see. But isn't there a legitimate reason for filing a second lawsuit if the first one is dismissed?
That was Eddie Alejandro's defense. He argued that the second lawsuit was justified because it involved a new cause of action, meaning a different legal issue.
So he was saying the second lawsuit wasn't simply a rehash of the first one.
Exactly. And the court actually dismissed Teresa Sierra's complaint against Eddie Alejandro.
Oh.
They found that there was a clear sequence of events.
Okay.
The first lawsuit was dismissed, and then later on a second lawsuit was filed based on a new cause of action.
So it wasn't a case of forum shopping because the second lawsuit had a legitimate basis.
That's right. The court emphasized that there needs to be genuine simultaneity of actions for forum shopping to exist. In this case, there wasn't making the second lawsuit a legitimate action.
This case highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of legal procedures and the need for strong evidence to support accusations of ethical violations.
Right.
It also shows that not every instance of multiple lawsuits is necessarily forum shopping.
Exactly. The court needs to carefully examine the circumstances to determine whether there's a genuine attempt to manipulate the system or simply a legitimate pursuit of legal remedies.
Okay, our final case for this part of our deep dive is Philippine Health Corporation v. Health Secretary, decided December 14, 2019. It involves a dispute over healthcare regulations and the importance of due process.
This case involved the Philippine Health Corporation, or PHC, and their authority to operate certain healthcare facilities. The Department of Health, or DOH, issued a cease and desist order, effectively shutting down some of PHC's operations.
So the DOH was saying, you can't do business here anymore. What was their reasoning?
They claimed that PHC was operating beyond the scope of its license and engaging in activities detrimental to public health.
That sounds serious. What did PHC do?
They fought back, arguing that the DOH had overstepped its bounds.
Yeah.
And that their right to due process had been violated.
Due process, the right to a fair hearing? Did the court agree?
They did, at least partially.
Yep.
The Supreme Court found that the DOH had failed to give PHC proper notice and a chance to respond before issuing the cease and desist order.
So even if the DOH had good intentions in protecting public health, they still had to follow proper procedures.
Precisely. The court emphasized that even government agencies must adhere to due process requirements when taking actions that impact the rights of individuals or entities.
But did the PHC ultimately win the case and get to keep operating those facilities?
The final outcome wasn't that clear-cut. The Supreme Court remanded the case back to the lower courts to determine whether PHC's licenses were valid as they were operating within the law.
So the case was still in limbo, with the ultimate outcome hinging on the legality of PHC's operations.
That's right. It's a reminder that legal battles can be complex and multifaceted, with both procedural and substantive issues at play.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. From inheritance disputes and plea bargains to the complexities of arbitration and government regulations, the Philippine legal landscape is full of twists and turns.
It's been a fascinating exploration of how legal principles play out in real-world scenarios.
I've learned so much about the interplay between procedural rules, substantive legal arguments, and the court's role in ensuring fairness and justice.
And we're not done yet. There are even more intriguing cases to uncover in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we continue our journey through the Philippine legal system.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Philippine legal cases, and we've saved some real head-scratchers for last.
Yeah, these cases touch on some fundamental principles of law and procedure.
Right.
And demonstrate the intricate workings of the Philippine legal system.
I'm ready to untangle these final legal knots. Let's jump right in with Philippine Health Corporation v. Health Secretary, decided December 14, 2019. We left off on a bit of a cliffhanger. The Supreme Court had sent the case back down to the lower courts to determine if PHC's licenses were valid.
This case highlights the tension between regulatory power and individual rights. The DOH had issued a cease and desist order against PHC, claiming they were operating healthcare facilities illegally and posing a risk to public health. While the Supreme Court found that the DOH had violated PHC's right to due process by not giving them a chance to respond before the shutdown. The ultimate outcome of whether PHC could operate hinged on the validity of their licenses.
So it was a partial victory for PHC, but the fight wasn't over yet. They still had to prove they were operating legitimately. It really underscores how important it is to have your legal ducks in a row, especially when dealing with government regulations.
Absolutely. Compliance is key, and understanding the scope of your licenses and permits is crucial for any business, especially in heavily regulated sectors like healthcare.
Okay, on to a case that delves into the power dynamics between government agencies and the importance of respecting jurisdictional boundaries. TSJV VOTR, decided July 6, 2020, involved a government contract dispute that went to arbitration, with TSJV, the construction company, winning a substantial sum of money.
This case revolved around the role of the Commission on Audit COA. In reviewing arbitration awards, the DOTR, unhappy with having to pay up, tried to delay payment by insisting on COA approval. COA, exercising its audit power, approved a partial payment, but disallowed some of TSJV's claims, effectively reducing the award amount.
So COA was essentially saying, we have the final say on government expenditures, even if an arbitration tribunal has already made a decision.
That was the DOTR's argument. But the Supreme Court stepped in and clarified COA's authority. They emphasized that while COA has a broad mandate to audit government spending, they can't overrule a final and executory decision made by another legitimate body, like an arbitration tribunal.
It's a crucial distinction that ensures the integrity of the arbitration process and prevents agencies from overstepping their bounds.
Checks and balances, right?
Uh-huh.
It's all about ensuring that each agency operates within its designated sphere of authority.
Okay, let's move on to a case that many borrowers might find relatable. Aniaclado v. GSIS decided October 6, 2021.
Oh?
It's a cautionary tale about the often overlooked details of loan agreements, particularly when borrowing from government institutions like GSIS.
Aniaclado took out loans from GSIS totaling around PHP 147,000. But due to accumulated interest and penalties, the amount she owed ballooned to over PHP 638,000.
That's an astronomical increase.
Yeah.
What happened? Did she simply miss payments, or was there more to the story?
She did fall behind on payments, and that's where those penalties started piling up.
Right.
She tried to fight those charges, arguing that they were excessive and that GSIS hadn't adequately informed her about the potential consequences of late payments.
So she was claiming a lack of transparency and fairness in how those charges were applied. It does seem like a shocking increase.
It's certainly a reminder to carefully scrutinize loan terms and conditions.
Yeah.
However, the court ultimately sided with GSIS, finding that the loan agreements clearly outline the interest rates and penalties.
So her argument that she wasn't fully aware of those terms didn't hold up in court.
The court emphasized that borrowers have a responsibility to read and understand contracts before signing them. They also noted that GSIS had sent multiple notices about her outstanding balance and the potential consequences of non-payment.
It highlights the importance of being proactive and informed when it comes to financial matters. Don't be afraid to ask questions and seek clarification if anything is unclear in a contract.
Absolutely. It's your money, and you have a right to fully understand the terms and conditions before making any commitments.
Okay, our next case revisits the parole evidence rule, but this time in a business loan context. In Development Bank of the Philippines v. Evelina Togol, decided October 6, 2021, we see the importance of clear written contracts when it comes to loan agreements.
Catherine Togol had secured a loan from DBP for a poultry growing project. But the bank later claimed that she hadn't met certain conditions that weren't explicitly spelled out in the written contract.
Okay.
They argued that she had verbally agreed to invest a specific amount of her own money and build a certain number of poultry houses.
So they were trying to enforce these alleged side agreements that weren't part of the official contract. That seems a bit shady.
It does raise questions about transparency and fairness.
Yeah.
However, the court sided with Catherine, citing the parole evidence rule.
Okay.
This rule basically says that if it's not in writing, it doesn't count. The court emphasized that written contracts provide clarity and certainty, preventing disputes based on he said, she said scenarios.
It's a theme we've seen repeated throughout these cases. Written contracts are crucial for protecting both parties involved.
Absolutely. A well-drafted contract serves as a roadmap, minimizing the potential for disagreements down the road.
Okay, let's move on to a case that delves into the legal ethics of forum shopping. In Teresa P. Sierra v. Eddy, Addy Joseph Anthony M. Alejandro decided August 23, 2023, a lawyer was accused of trying to game the system by filing multiple lawsuits.
At study, Alejandro filed 2 separate actions, seeking a preliminary injunction.
Right.
Teresa Sierra, the opposing party, claimed he was engaging in forum shopping, trying to find a judge who would rule in his favor. However, the court dismissed Teresa's complaint, finding that the second lawsuit was filed after the first one was properly dismissed, and that it was based on a new cause of action.
So it wasn't forum shopping because the second lawsuit was a legitimate action based on a different legal issue.
That's the court's conclusion. They found that there was no overlap or simultaneity between the 2 actions, which is a key element of forum shopping.
It's a reminder that not every instance of multiple lawsuits is automatically forum shopping. The court needs to carefully examine the circumstances to determine whether there's a genuine attempt to manipulate the system.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about ensuring fairness and preventing the abuse of legal processes.
Okay, ready for our final case. It's a case that really showcases how a seemingly small procedural detail can make all the difference. In Republic v. Susan Datwin, decided July 28, 2020, the Republic was seeking to reclaim several pieces of land, but their case was dismissed due to a misstep with a request for admission.
The Republic was arguing that the lands in question were inalienable, meaning they belonged to the state and should never have been privately owned. However, they failed to respond properly to a request for admission. which is a legal tool used to establish undisputed facts in a case.
So the landowners sent the Republic a list of statements, and the Republic's response essentially admitted to those statements, undermining their entire case.
That was the finding of the trial court, which granted summary judgment in favor of the landowners. However, the Supreme Court overturned that decision, finding that the trial court had relied too heavily on that procedural issue and hadn't considered the merits of the Republic's claims.
So it was a victory for procedural fairness, ensuring that a technicality didn't prevent the Republic from having their case heard properly.
Precisely. It highlights the principle that procedural rules, while important, shouldn't be used to obstruct justice or prevent a case from being decided fairly.
Wow, what a journey through the Philippine legal system. We've covered everything from credit card debt and land disputes to human trafficking and government corruption. It's been fascinating to see how these real-life scenarios intersect with legal principles and procedural rules.
These cases demonstrate the complexities of the law and how it impacts our daily lives.
Absolutely.
Every legal battle tells a story, offering valuable insights into human behavior, societal challenges, and the constant evolution of our justice system.
I've definitely gained a deeper understanding of the importance of knowing your rights, protecting your interests, and navigating the legal system effectively. Whether you're buying a property, entering into a contract, or facing a legal dispute, understanding these principles can empower you to make informed decisions and protect yourself.
And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. There's a vast ocean of legal knowledge out there, and continuous learning is key to navigating this complex and ever-changing landscape.
That's a great point. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We encourage you to delve further into any of the cases that piqued your interest. And as always, thanks for joining us on this legal adventure.